Monet Masters, Tavia Forbes of Forbes Masters, Whitney Ray and Joel Kelly of Wyeth Ray Interiors, and they are here to tell us today about their stories. So before we get too into it, I'd love each of them to go down the line and tell us about your bio, your background, how'd you get to be here?
I'm the Masters of Forbes Masters. Some people don't know how to differentiate us. I started out Houston, Texas, migrated to Atlanta when I learned about SCAD, applied to the college, went to the Atlanta campus. That's actually where I first met Joel Kelly. I used to sneak in on his classes. I like to say that he was my professor, but I was sneaking in on his classes. Graduated SCAD and landed my first job at a hospitality design firm and quit very shortly after.
I'm Tavia Forbes, the Forbes of Forbes Masters. I moved to Atlanta after college. I went to school in New York. I'm originally from Jamaica. I studied business and art, and when I moved to Atlanta, I loved event design and wanted to get into that. It was during the recession. That was very difficult. People weren't having as many events. So I did operations, and I quit that job because I just hated it. And without having a job in mind, I think I was 1 month into 2 weeks into my 1 month notice that I gave the company, and I met my mentor, and I have been designing ever since, and that was about 12 years ago.
I'm Whitney Ray of Wyeth Ray Interiors, and I am from Atlanta actually. I went to school in Birmingham and kind of did the more traditional route. I started as an intern, junior designer, senior designer. I've been with a couple different firms in Atlanta who do really great work, and started Wyeth Ray Interiors with Joel 4 years ago.
Joel Kelly of Wyeth Ray Interiors. So I started out as an architect. I actually still am an architect, and have that business as well, and had been working in that for about 20 years or so. It seems like longer sometimes. And Whitney and I formed Wyeth Ray to take over the interiors portion of the business 4 years ago.
Great, thank y'all. So Whitney, I'd like to start off with you. At what point in your career were you ready to take the leap? How did you know it was time?
I feel like I don't know, every time I talk to someone and hear their story about how they got to where they are, it's always a little different. But for me, having my own business was always the goal. When I was in school, I never, I didn't switch majors. I always knew what I wanted to do. I always wanted to have my own business. And so I kind of, like I said, I started through internships and junior designer, got to senior designer. And after almost 10 years, I felt like, there's always gonna be a world of knowledge for you to learn still. But you can either jump in or you can keep learning and stay a little more on the safer route. And I just felt like it was time. And Joel and I had been friends. We had known each other a really long time before we started this. And so he was always someone that I looked up to, and I was like a mentor to me. And I was talking to him about how I wanted to start a business, and it's scary, and what do I need to do in order to do that? And through those conversations is kind of how we formed.
Awesome. Pivoting to Tavia and Monet, how long has it been since you've been together? You two were working independently before. Yes. What made you feel the need to team up?
We actually met on a project where Monet was making her exit, and I took over that project. And Monet called me the next day, not the phone call I was expecting, but the phone call that I needed. And we became friends. We became work friends, and we complained a lot about working as single designers. We did not have enough budget. There's not enough help, and we probably made the leap 3 years after that meeting. We would assist each other on projects, and I think I approached you a couple of times, like, "Hey, what do you think?" And it was.
I brushed her off. That was the very nice PG version of our story. I'll get down to this is how we balance each other out. I'll get down to the nitty. I left that horrible hospitality firm and started to struggle for 2 years. with my own interior design company. And towards the end of that second year, I got a call from a client who had a salon. And I had never done commercial work, and it was the largest project that I had been offered. I took it because I needed the money, and I designed the heck out of it, like every detail you could think about, and it just stood still because I didn't know how to progress the project. And so after a while, the client got very irritated and basically contacted another designer, and that was Tavia. And so basically came to me and said, we love you, we love your work, but we're just not moving. And at the time, Tavia had been known for doing a few salons in the Atlanta area, and so she invited us to do a meeting. And I was young, was very young, and angry, and very egotistical. And so I showed up to the meeting, and I'm like, who the heck? Like, you want to bring in another designer on my project? Mind you, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm offended that another designer has been invited in on the project. So long story short, after the meeting, Tavia and I, we stayed behind, and she turned to me because the meeting was horrible, and she's like, look, this is what you have to do with people like this, and she gave me a quick rundown. And then after that, I went home, and I was like, who the heck is Tavia? And I started Googling her, and I was like, oh, she's also Jamaican, she's also eclectic, and what I found I really liked. And then shortly after that, I got a call from the client to say that they were letting me go and hiring Tavia. No surprise. And so the next day, I called Tavia, and she thought I was calling to curse her out. I was calling her to say, hey, thank you for staying behind and speaking with me a little bit. I'd love to assist you on your projects, learn from you, basically continue to build a relationship, and that's how we started a work friendship, and that developed into a real friendship. And then that's when you hop in. You want to do that?
So where was I? Oh, I was in New York. I was going back and forth between New York and Atlanta, and I got a call to do an office, and was not. I asked them, when do you need this done by? And they said next weekend. I was like, no, that's not even feasible. But then something said, let's try. And so I called Monet and asked her if she could take the consultation, and she took the consultation that day, landed the job, and I flew back to Atlanta that night, and we worked on that project. We got it done in a week, and was like, this is fun. And subsequently, Monet got a phone call, I think the following week after that, to do a nursery, and we just decided to merge our names and start Forbes Masters.
It's a great story.
It was a
Really
great
fun.
story. I think it actually points to something that I know was going to be up and coming in a minute, is why do you partner with somebody? And what strengths and weaknesses, or what's the reason for being? I think you said a great thing. It's there is a balance between you. You two are not the same mind, you are not the same people, and you don't approach things the same way. And that's what attracts you to that person. You've got to find a partner that has not got the exact same strengths that you have.
Yeah,
It's something that balances out your weaknesses from that standpoint.
I absolutely agree. To that point, and I'll end here. When we first merged, it was chaotic because we were doing the opposite of what you just mentioned. We were looking for the other just to be another of the other. And I always tell this one story. We were at a client's house. Tavia was standing on the dining room table hanging a chandelier. We don't hang chandeliers anymore. We should never. And I looked at her, I was like, well, why are you hanging it that way? Because in my mind, I was like, you hang it this way, the way that I do it. And she was hanging it the way that she hangs it. And when I asked her that, she turns around and she's like, because this is how you do it. And I was like, okay. And
She just panned out of the frame, walked out.
But it wasn't until our mentor sat us down in her dining room for 4 hours and basically helped us to realize where you're weak, she's strong, and where you're strong, she's weak. And that's how you guys are going to develop and continue to grow once you respect each other for each other's strengths.
It's a great endpoint. Thank you. But to piggyback on that, Joel, it was you who approached Whitney. Is that correct?
It is. We had talked about it for a long time, just in terms of what one's goals are. I think that's a piece of what I've typically done throughout my life, is ask people where they're headed, what they're doing, and if there's a method or means in which I can help them, then it's something that I enjoy doing. Whitney had been working with someone that I was very good friends with. We all got to be friends. I knew she was in the process of figuring out her exit strategy from that company. And there was a need within my company to diversify and also bring in somebody with a similar but different point of view to things. I also started out, I think she was 29. You were 29 when we started this thing, and I was 29 when I opened my first company. So she was definitely at that stage where she wanted to go forward. And sort of the combination between us was going to give her a springboard to start where I had spent 20 years getting to, and that was going to be her step one, which was kind of great. So it allowed her to really jump forward of a lot of the sort of things that I had to go through with failures and trial and error and everything else when I was younger. And hopefully I would be able to steer something to where she wouldn't have to experience a lot of the pain of early business ownership. And I think, in general, we've done that. Of course, there's always pain in business ownership. But I think when you've got a partner that has your back, either her mine or mine hers, you can build on everything that you've got and make it better and stronger. So I think that's where we sort of balance out at that point. She's also a lot nicer than I am. So when sometimes everyone knows her is nicer than me, so that's how that works. But where I find frustration with things, she's able to come in and diffuse a situation. I would say that's a vice versa thing too, that there are points at where she is exasperated with something and I come in and, oddly enough, I'm the calm one. So it helps balance things out a lot.
Or like yesterday when he said, "What is wrong with you?"
Well, there's that.
No, for me, I mean, it's an unbelievable gift. I will never stop singing his praises for what he did for me. But it was hard too, because I'm a very independent person. I think I can do everything on my own. I'm a little stubborn, and but at the same time, I'm not stupid. So I made my pros and cons list of, these are all the things that you can have if you start your own company from scratch. It might be hard in the beginning, but eventually it'll be yours. Or you take a partner who has extreme amount of experience, and not just in design, but also in the business side of things, which obviously I'd never run my own business. And not to mention just having someone who, I always say, if there's a problem, I have someone who goes through all of that with me, helps me figure it out. We probably come up with 2 different solutions and they end up merging together at some point. But also, when something awesome happens, someone cares as much as I do. It's not like I'm excited for you, because he's excited for himself, because he won too. So I think that having a partner, it's by far the best thing I've ever done. But it was definitely, it wasn't like I just made the decision in a second. I had to sit there and think about, this is what that means. But it definitely worked out.
So, Joel, you were just saying, you've had 20 plus years of experience. What was it about Whitney in particular? I mean, you could have gone to someone who equally had 20 plus years of experience. What was it about her that you knew that she was the one?
I think there are always plus that has the same amount of experience that you have. What I've found in our business is a lot of that experience travels very similar paths for people. I like to have a much younger point of view, especially in design, to look at things from both a different generation and how you put things together, how you relate to people. I do not need another me in a company. One of me is way more than enough most times. So having someone with a different perspective is useful. Whitney and I have a similar but not identical aesthetic when it comes to interiors. So where I would push certain things, she pushes different things. I also needed someone that was softer in a certain way in terms of the way that they approach the world. After 20 years of doing things, you can be very stubborn in the way that you want to work on things, and having someone that looks at you and challenges you on why you want to do that, why are we supposed to do that way, is important. And I think that's vice versa as well. So I think that as much as I tended to think of myself as like a mentor from that perspective, I would say she equally does that for me today. So.
That is sweet. Okay, so you now know that you want a partner. You want to unite. Tell us more about like the specifics. What's the process like? What are the critical questions that you had to ask? Thadia, would you like to start?
I feel like for us, it was very fluid. We were trying to, one, get to know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we started to divide particular tasks. And we kind of just jumped into partnering. We even became roommates. We lived together and worked at our business, at our kitchen island. So I don't know if there was something very specific for us, but it was, I would say, a listening moment. We had to always consider one another, and learning to be in a relationship was critical to learning to be in a business relationship.
To piggyback off of that, I would say a lot of the same things. Partnering with Tavia has been the closest thing to marriage I've ever experienced. And I think that to answer that question, over time and just having conversations, we've developed a system of who does what, and then obviously based off of our strengths and weaknesses. But it's getting to the point of being overwhelmed or frustrated that we really hear each other out and understand, okay, this is what you need, this is what I need. For example, Tavia is she's a very relaxed, very fluid person. Nothing gets to her most times. Things rolls off of her shoulder and she's good to go. And so oftentimes when thinking about design, like Joel said, we have similar design tastes, but still different. It would become a battle of, okay, well, which light fixture are we going to use? I want to use this one. She wants to use that one. And oftentimes she'll just be like, whatever you want, type of thing. And until we had a conversation of making sure that we were representing both of our options and our aesthetics in the design was important. That was something that I didn't realize that we weren't doing. And so after that conversation, we had more detailed design meetings about the final design of a room before we made it final.
Nice. Whitney, do you have anything?
No, I love you, but you took my answer. No, I think that it's funny because I am also married, but having Joel as a partner or any partner, business partner, I think is very much like a marriage. Because if you think that you're gonna marry someone who's exactly like you, you're going to be single. It just doesn't happen. So, someone who thinks the same way you do, someone who organizes the same way you do, and everything, is just, you're not going to find a carbon copy of yourself. So instead of, nitpicking all those things to death every time I find a pile sitting on a table or whatever it may be, and I want to go and stuff it into a drawer, I just say, this is his process. That is not my business. And, it's accepting the changes and why they make each other great too, because there's so many things that he does that I do not do, and those are what make him special and extremely talented. So I'm not going to, try to nitpick those things to death.
And I don't file.
Yes.
Yes, I know.
Okay, so you started talking about my next question. So every relationship has its ups and downs. What are the difficulties of partnering? I know you've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but how do you work through your challenges?
Why do I have to be the one that answers that?
You?
Therapy.
Therapy. It's expensive.
It's a marriage. Yes. I think I started to go to therapy first, just for myself, and then soon after, I just had to lay the 4 fingers on her hand and say, "Friend, I think it's time that you consider some therapy as well," for personal reasons. And I think it just innately helped our relationship under the business umbrella as well. But We converse about our differences and problems that arise. Oftentimes, I will have to start the conversation or ask questions. I feel like this is a therapy session right now. I'm like looking at Tavia to make sure what I'm saying is okay, because she's very expressive. But I will prompt questions, or I'll ask very detailed questions just to make sure I'm understanding how she feels about something. Because it's easy to just kind of gloss over when you're in the chaotic process of trying to prove things or complete a project. It's easy to just move past something that is not completely hashed out. So communication.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the key thing to any business relationship is you have to understand what you're after in the end of everything, okay? And you go back to that when you're making decisions that are in the moment and go, what is the end goal that we're both trying to get to? You have to have a shared goal no matter what. I think that's in a marriage, not that I have one, but it's in a marriage, it's in a business relationship, it's in a friendship, it's everything else. You keep the people around you that share your basic values and basic end goal. We do disagree on things. The key is that if you take it from a project perspective, the goal is the best project that a project can be. Okay, how we get there is utterly different, both in terms of the way we deal with the client, the way we design, the way we pick things out, but our end goal is the same end goal. So a lot of times we'll take and figure out where we're headed or what the end result will be or what we want it to be, and we'll throw things together and put it together and see where we land. A lot of times it's shockingly similar. A lot of times it is shockingly different. But the goal is to get the best product, okay? I look at it from a purely project, photography, publishing perspective in a lot of ways, where Whitney will tend to look at it more from making sure the client's happy. Those are two very different goals sometimes. And one of the keys with that is understanding how much of each do we go after. So my goal is to take a project and make sure that once it's like we've pleased the client, that it is also exceptional in terms of its overall design aesthetic. So it's a back and forth. I don't think we go through things and say, this is the way, it's this way or no way. We both have that moment of, well, what do we want? And it's hard for us. I mean, from a personality level, I am an only child, independent Capricorn. I mean, that I'm in a partnership is astonishing.
Only child, independent Taurus.
Yeah. So lots of butting heads, lots of horns. But I think the key is that you have to understand that, you're going to get there. And it's also, I think both of us respect each other a lot when it comes to those aspects. If we didn't respect each other, it would not work. And again, it doesn't mean you agree all the time. It just means that you both respect each other's point of view on things and try to make it work. So
yeah, I think that's really at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how vast your differences are. If you have trust and respect in a relationship, because even though let's say we disagree on something, I respect him enough to hear his point of view completely in its entirety, without saying, no, that's wrong. And vice versa. We get through our entire, this is what I think, this is what you think. And the other part of that, though, is trust, because I trust that what he thinks is right is the best thing for the company to him. It's not like he's just trying to get his way or trying to be difficult. What he wants is because he thinks it's going to be best for us. So I feel like it's rare that, it's, I don't know, I don't think we've ever had like an actual argument about anything, but it's more just, respecting the other person and their opinion. We also play the who cares most game, which is similar, except that sounds a little one way, because it sounds like you care most.
Yeah, Tavia doesn't care about it.
But we play who cares most because, let's say there's some kind of detail or whatever it may be, and I'm like, this is the way it needs to be because I have this vision. And he's like, okay, because he doesn't care as much, as opposed to if it's an architectural detail where he's wanting something, I'm like, kind of messing up my whatever, but I don't care as much. So I don't know, you don't need to fight for the things that you don't care as much about. It just seems silly.
yeah, we found there are no absolutes. I think that's one of the keys in this business relationship. We both have strong opinions about things, but there are very few things, and I don't know if I could name any in particular right now, where it's like it is an absolute no. I think if you draw lines in the sand with a partner or anybody, you have started the end process of that partnership. So you have to talk to each other and you have to listen to each other. I mean, you're going to agree. There are a lot of times that I think we go into a thing and we listen and we're still steadfast in what we think, but a lot of times what happens for both of us, and we do this almost identically, is we come back the next day and go, I gave that some more thought, and I'm fine with what you want to do there. And so we tend to try to step back from that immediate sort of altercation or disagreement and let it sit for a minute a lot of times. So,
Well, going into like a little more of the legal side of this, your operating agreement when you established, what was the most important item that you included? Because, I mean, we all know that not all marriages work out. People fall out of love. So how have you addressed if the partnership doesn't work out?
great. I mean, it's like a prenup. It's really weird in a lot of ways. We had a lawyer that put ours together, and I looked at it and I'm like, this is so offensive even to me. I can't do this. And so there are protections in place for both of us in the event that we leave. We've got a clause for voluntary removal of yourself from the project. We've got clauses that allow for dismissal, which I can't imagine that either one of us would go through, but they're there in case. And for instance, we started this business relationship with 3 people. So we had a third partner, and he chose to leave 6 months after it was started, and he chose on his own. And so one of the clauses in there is if you voluntarily leave, you get nothing. That's your choice. So the rest of us are working for it. You don't want to. And that's, I can tell you now, neither one of us will ever voluntarily leave because neither one of us is walking away with this with nothing. But by the same token, there are respectful aspects to it. So it started out with me being the principal partner, 2 junior partners, and both of them were going to work their way up to full partnership within a 5-year period. When the other partner left, Whitney took over. We split his shares and became more fulfilled within the partnership. And then over the last 4 years, Whitney has moved up to where we are 50-50 partners in this business. And while that's, a lot of people have looked at me in the process and go, that's a lot to give away. I'm like, yeah, nothing's been given from that perspective. There's an earned partnership at that point. And at this point, I can't imagine not having her in that business at all. And I think that we kind of codified that within the agreement so that was part of the puzzle that was put together.
And Tavia, Renee, how have you addressed if you decide to walk away from each other?
I think we're just open communication at this moment. We will probably get more into the legality of that, but underneath the umbrella of Forbes Masters, there are many things that we plan to do, and within the home space and the design space. And each of us may decide to go in a different direction within that space, but making sure that we keep that under the umbrella of Forbes Masters, and that way we can explore businesses within the business, essentially.
Okay. So here's a question. When should you decline to partner? I mean, what are the telltale signs of fools rushing in? Have you ever been approached or thought about approaching someone?
I think the biggest thing with partnerships and the win-tos, win-not-tos are don't ever get into a partnership when you're desperate to get into a partnership. And don't do it when you feel like you need to survive. Now that goes exactly against some of the stuff that we're talking about. But I think that that a piece of the puzzle for you guys, for example, was you didn't jump into the partnership immediately. There's a big thing. And this is where the marriage thing comes in. You dated for a while. And that lets you know who you're getting together with. I think for anybody, you need to know the person you're going to be doing something. Don't do it just from a business position. Don't do it from that. You got to know who you're dealing with and talking to. It didn't just happen by like, I like their work, let's be a partner. those kinds of things have happened in the past where I've talked to or wanted to be with someone on a partnership level, but my basic bent has never been to partner with anyone. It was always, I think she and I share the same thing of we could both do everything on our own. And for me, it was the realization of I cannot do everything on my own, and I would like for this business to grow, and the best way for that to grow is to have another person to do this with. And so I think that that's an aspect of wanting to do it instead of needing to do it. That's important. So I would always suggest declining when it's a necessity or you're in financial straits or anything like that. Do it when you're at your strongest, not when you're at your weakest.
That's a good point.
I agree. I think a similar comparison would be just employment and hiring. We've seen a significant difference in hiring quickly and not going through a full vetting process versus, hiring too soon. Those persons typically fall off quicker, or we end up letting them go. And so I guess that's a comment or a piggyback off of the dating process. And then for Tavia and myself, we had known each other for 2 or 3 years before we decided to merge. And during those 2 or 3 years, Tavia had the idea of coming together and just building one company. At the time, my perspective was I hadn't gotten my feet wet enough, and I didn't want to collaborate with someone and feel like I was just working for them. And so we were actually developing a separate business, and it's not until we were thrown onto a project and I was able to see how we collaborated and how we worked together that I realized, oh, we could totally do this. And that was literally, that project was when the company started. We never stopped after that.
Great. So Wyeth Ray Interiors has been here since 2017. Forbes Masters 2014. How's it going?
I think it's going great. I think it's going great. I oftentimes, I don't even realize, like even being here, I remember while in school coming to ADAC and like pressing all of the showroom managers for samples and getting scolded at because I was never bringing the samples back and wasn't working on any projects. But to now be here on a platform and being a part of this amazing event, that amongst all of the other opportunities that have come our way, it's a daily reminder, and it just keeps me in a place of gratitude. I could have never accomplished on my own what Tavia and I together have accomplished, and every day is a gift. It's overwhelming, and it's hard because we're doing this for the first time, but I'm truly blessed and thankful for her friendship and partnership.
Agreed.
No, you can't get away with that. I need more.
She's the long-winded one. It's almost surreal. And to Monique's points, we could not have done this by ourselves or working within a company. Being able to work with someone that you can bounce ideas off of and to serve as each other's foil, to recognize some of the things that you're weak in and where your strengths lie, and being able to have a conversation about that and work with someone through all of that within a business and a relationship. It's kind of all-encompassing. So it works well for your business and also your personal life at the same time.
No, it's been incredible. While I would love to have said in the beginning, this is going to be the most successful thing in the world, it still felt like a very it was uphill, even though I got to start with a handful of great clients, I still had to work my butt off to prove to those clients that I was worthy of being partners with Joel. It's been an incredibly intense 4 years, but I feel like this year specifically has just been incredible. We've had some amazing publications. I have 27 something clients right now. We are just, I mean, we've built an incredible staff that I'm so proud of, and I love us.
It is great. I am much more at peace than I was 4 years ago. And I think a large part of that is the partnership. I also think when she talks about, busting her butt to earn respect, the funniest thing that's happened to me since the partnership is actually going to a few showrooms that I had not been to in a while. And I'm getting something and they don't know who I am. And they're like, "Oh, you work for Whitney." And I'm like, yes, actually, sometimes I do. And it's just, there's a humbling aspect of that that's pretty great. But you also know that she's made it when they anticipate that I work for her, which I think is pretty great. So I think there's a voluntary, though sometimes kicking and screaming, reduction of ego that happens when you're with a partner. And it is important that you are not the only voice in the room, and that person has an equal or greater voice than you. I think that's critical to partnership. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So what advice would you give to the designer who's on the cusp of taking the next step, but they're not quite sure what to do or how to go about it? Whitney, would you like to start off?
I would say, like practical advice, I would say photography and building up a presence, even if it's on Instagram. I knew photography was important for publication, and you hear portfolio, but you get used to, and I worked for bigger firms, they're just so well known. You don't think about their portfolio having to have been built up over time. But for us, I started off doing inspiration images basically on our Instagram just so that I could build something and I could say, this is what I love about these pieces. And then slowly over time, those inspiration images turned into our own images. And, now our Instagram is filled with projects that we actually got to complete. But I think that you just don't realize how great it is to, while you're doing these small installations, let's say you're doing a one-room job or whatever it may be, do all the vignette shots you can. Even if you don't feel like you can take a photograph of the entire room, take as much photography as you can, because it goes so far, and it's the only proof you have to show to someone and say, hey, look, I'm talented. You hire me. Because you're probably not going to want to take those clients to your smaller jobs, to see those homes, because you're going to look at the whole thing and you're going to have to go through and say, I didn't do that and I didn't do that. But if you have a small vignette that's beautiful and you pair it with some other inspiration images of where you want to go, clients can kind of get a feel for what that's like.
I would also say take a few business classes. If you are going to go out on your own, actually learn how to manage your business, because that's most of the work in a design firm. And budgeting, logistics, showing that you can bring a project from beginning to completion, I think is critical.
I would say to make yourself available to other designers who you admire, whose style you like, who are successful, and just make it clear what you're able to offer and not necessarily what you need to get from that designer. But there are so many designers that I worked under and gained so much influence and insight on how they ran their business, the process and structure of their business, just by being on site, whether it was bringing in all their accessories or whether it was at the presentation, at the install, but just making myself available to them. And that taught me a lot on the residential side, because in school, for me, it was just all commercial. And, that was something that I decided I no longer wanted to do. And then the other thing I would say is, to Whitney's point, in getting pictures of your own work. I remember offering my services for anyone who had an X amount budget, and completely did a room in their house for free, just so that I was able to get pictures and start to build a website. So it's just your version of hustle. There are many different things to do to get your name out there. In terms of social media, you just want to be in someone's face at all times. So constantly posting.
I think all of that's amazing and actually completely accurate. I think one of the things that as a designer you need to have or do is you need to be confident in what you're doing and sell that confidence. Do not let it slip into arrogance though, because that is, people don't want to be shoved into doing certain things, but they want to know that you know what you're doing. And when something doesn't work out, which it never works out completely, don't pout about it. I think attitude in design is as important as design itself, and how we go about it and present ourselves is really critical. So I think if you've got some business acumen, which is important, and I wish all of us learned a little bit more about that in school. We have all gone through the hard knocks of that. Is critical. I think going in and showing what you can do is critical, and I think the way you present that to people is the next step of making that work. So.
Well, this has been fantastic. All are a wealth of information and great storytelling. Thank you all. I think we have some time for some questions, if anyone in the audience has anything. Oh. Okay.
Take it around. Sorry, getting to you. Thank you for being here. Great input. My question is, if the business needs some capital influx, how do you handle that, and is that equivalent to your partnership ownership?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been at this for a long time. I think that, early on, I actually borrowed money to be able to do certain things with a business. That can be a death knell to the business sometimes. When things sort of started back up after the market crash in 2007, 8, 9, one of the tenets for me was never borrow money. So it's always on a cash basis. Whatever we can afford, we afford. But I will not buy anything that we can't afford. If I can't pay for it that month or the next, it's not happening. That may not be the smartest thing, but it's safe. So I think especially when you're young, don't get yourself into a cash crunch would be the first big thing. Later on, if you want to borrow money and you know that there's a method of paying it, that's great. But don't count your chickens before the eggs hatch in a lot of ways. One of Whitney's comments to me all the time is like, that project's not real until I have a check in hand. And it's true, there's a lot of things where we presuppose something that might happen and get ourselves into trouble moving forward. So I think just be careful with money.
Yeah, while we have projections, so that we have an idea of what the cash flow is going to be coming in, you never know 100%. So while it is safe, I 100% agree with, if you can get away with it, do not make the jump into purchasing something you can't afford.
I would say for us, Tavy and I, we started, out of college, and we were used to living on very little. And so I think at a point in time where we decided we wanted to increase our business flow or productivity or team, we sacrificed internally. That each of us or both of us decided to either take home less so that we're able to afford whatever is needed. Because to Joel's point, we prefer not to have to pull out a loan and have to pay that back.
Especially if you're starting your business, because you just don't know where it will go. So be very conservative in the beginning.
Anybody else? I'm sure there's some questions out there. Sure.
Hi. You mentioned when you're on a project, you separate the work. How do you decide who does what, and can you give some examples?
So sometimes we call dibs on projects if we're really interested. When we first started, I was very much a type A in probably the worst sense. And Tavia taught me how to romance and build a relationship with a client. So just by our personalities, we would bond with clients differently, and so that would be the deciding factor in terms of like who was the senior designer on a certain project. That's probably no longer the case now, and so how we do that is just to make sure that we're distributing work evenly, and so the same amount of projects that she has, I have, and then the other would just serve as a junior designer to the other, while one is the primary designer and point of contact.
Yeah. And we do things a little bit differently because Joel is all things architecture, so I am not an architect, he is, but he's also an interior designer. So we have projects that he's excited about and we want to work on together. And then I have quite a few projects where I'm the principal designer and I have junior designers on the staff. And typically it's similar, but I figure out the personality of the client or maybe the design intent of that project, and I pair it with a junior designer. So typically it's a junior designer and me working on a project, or it's a junior designer and Joel and I together working on a project. It just depends.
Yeah, and we switch fit a lot of times too. We'll have clients that we both have worked with for a while, and if we get stuck, one of us gets stuck on it, the other one takes over some of the components of it. So I think one of the things is it's watching the personality level of those clients and also the relationships that we've both built, because we build different kinds of relationships with those clients. And I think you just have to, again, you have to set aside ego and go, what's the best thing to get the outcome we're both trying to get to, and what's good for the company and what's good for the client. And so, I think that's one of the keys is you let them sort where they're going to sort. It's almost like being in Harry Potter with the sorting hat, you get what you're supposed to be with. And so I think we let it naturally divide in a lot of ways.
And that can happen mid-project.
Mm-hmm.
So
It does.
I'll always. I feel like projects that I start or Tavia start, the other will finish. Because the personality of the client at that point is developing differently at certain stages of the project, especially now in the pandemic. But it's important that at the start of every project that the client knows the whole team and understands that, they're going to see different parts of the team at different points of the project.
Yeah.
Great question. Anyone else? There we go. I can get there.
This is for Monet and Tavia. I've met you guys a few years ago, but I've watched your work over the past couple of years, and I'm interested in hearing more about what the two styles were like before you married, and then how it's evolved over time.
the question was about our design styles.
Before we merged and then now, before we merged.
I feel like we've had a similar design aesthetic. We're both pretty eclectic, and we continue that now, of course, with infusion from the client, but we have generally a similar design style. Monet's going to be more colorful. I'm probably going to be more muted, but both pretty eclectic, I think. And right now, we're working on actually seriously honing down our style as Forbes Masters and how to replicate that almost and help our team work on our design style versus exactly what the client wants as well.
And if I could elaborate on that, you just let me know. Just cut me off whenever. But if I could elaborate on that, for so long, we've been in the business for so long. Since starting our business, it was very much about the client and, just trying to understand their personality and need and function and aesthetic. And it was meeting the client where they were and developing this beautiful custom design for them, right? We've all heard interior designers say that. And we're getting to a point in the business where it's just not profitable for us because what that equates to is shopping from different vendors and you don't have a consistent vendor base or a team of people that you're working with because, we're classical on this side and then we're ultra modern and then we're doing, eclectic and there's just different styles that we love. So we're trying to rebrand and determine what it looks like to be able to still meet the client where they are and develop like a custom design for them, but also be profitable on that project and hone in on one vendor, for example, so that we're able to get to stock and dealer or get a better price on furniture by purchasing consistently with one vendor. And what does that look like? Because obviously we don't want to develop designs that look like you've seen in the showroom, or you look at one full room and you're like, oh, all of that is X vendor. But trying to develop a look that represents us and is consistent while still different per project.
Complicated problem.
Well,
Yeah.
you let me know about it.
Well, it's, we have the same problem. So, one of the things for us is we have an incredibly diverse portfolio with modern, traditional, transition, everything that you call it, we've got it. And it's a complicated thing to sell because it's a whole other discussion. But I think it's amazing that you are figuring that out and trying to determine what's branding look. I think most of the really highly successful designers do that. Consistently can tell this is a fair project. And the downfall of that is they look similar. And that's where you try to figure out what is the leeway you're going to give the client in actually one direction. Also, it gives you the ability to know certain projects because that isn't going to fit our aesthetic. So that's sort of find out.
Hey, let us know.
Wish us luck.
I feel like it's deciding if it's going to, if profit is going to lead you, or if it's your creative license, I feel like it truly is a battle between the two.
Yeah.
So ADAC, let's get that discussion going.
Yeah, that's a good discussion.
We have one more question, or let me get to you. Con, to you next.
I think you kind of tapped into what my question was, which was how do you guys deal with clients, if you've had that experience, that may contact you simply because of your company or who your name is, as opposed to what your style is, and that client may have a totally different type of vibe or style than what you guys typically do? Like, how do you handle someone that's just completely in a different realm than you are?
For us, we are, if you look at our portfolio, we really do. We have traditional to modern aesthetic and pretty much everything in between. I'm trying to think of what there is out there that I wouldn't be excited to do. I think that's part of our problem. So to your point, yes, obviously I want to make money. That's the goal. But it's also, I love all kinds of different styles. They're not my personal styles, not what I have at home, but that's what I love about it, because I get to go on this journey of something that's different than I had to do last week, and that's what's so exciting about it to me. So I think that it's something Joel and I, it's funny because we have been talking about this since we started the company. We still do not have an answer. It obviously is, the answer is we want to do different things and we're just still fighting it.
Yeah, I think we've got a project currently that is currently the most out there. Both of us tend to be fairly calm in our color palettes. There is so much color in this thing that it is blinding in a certain way. But by the same token, it pushes us to be something different than what we've ever been before. That diversity is great. And again, we do fight the exact same thing we're talking about. Our stuff is hot clients. The quality that stays consistent on this is excellent. So it's just hard to sell. Especially if you're trying to get in and sell your portfolio. There are tons of clients, there are tons of designers who come and have specific looks. Go, I want that, and get that. For us, let's figure out what's the new wheel we're going to construct today. So it's a different process.
You do have some clients that will, to your question, will contact us, and the style kind of reflects the caliber of the caliber and quality of aesthetic and furniture. And so we will typically, in all honesty, price ourselves out. We'll probably double our fees, and that will just send them running. Or we'll say, actually this design firm would be perfect for this client. So we are sure to like develop a network of other designers that we can suggest our inquiries, our potential clients to. One thing that we often see is inquiries from African American homeowners. They specifically want to work with a African American firm. We hear two young hip Black women. We just, that's why we want to work with you. And then we see the design style. We're like, oh, that's great, that's wonderful. And we see the design style, and we're absolutely not interested. I think Tavia went to a consultation one time, and this couple built a bed. The bed, to get on the bed, they did a custom bed, and the height of the bed was 32 inches.
It was like here on me, and I'm 5 feet. Like that was.
And they were so adamant to want to work with us, and I think in that situation, again, we just priced ourselves out, or we'll just suggest another designer that we know would be great for the job.
I think we've got one more here.
I like a physical reaction to that bed. Why did you tell me about that?
Have you ever had to cancel a client? And if so, how did you handle it?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, thank you. I have had to do that on a couple of occasions. But I one of my, you kind of get into especially lately, that there's so many potential clients that have come our way in the past 6 months or so, even a year. But you kind of get into your drive of, this is my pitch of what I do, and you just kind of going through it. And one of the things I say is, it has to work for you and it has to work for me. It's a relationship for both of us. We both have to be invested. I have to be excited about it. You have to be, you have to have the trust in me. It goes both ways. So there's been a couple of occasions where I do that. They seem on board, and then we start going down the road, and it's just not right, for whatever reason. And it could be money. It usually is. You can give someone an estimated budget up front, and they don't completely process what that means. That's typically where it is. But I do try to. I've never had just a knockout, drag out bite, whatever, that kind of thing. It's more just this is where we need to go. This is what we agreed to, and I don't think it's going to work. And they usually agree, and it's uncomfortable, but I don't think I've had anything too unpleasant.
We've had a few unpleasant ones. We have had to cancel projects in the middle of projects, walk away from a project because the relationship wasn't right, or we didn't feel like we were treated our best in that process. And so we have a few clauses in our contract that deal with termination if we choose to terminate a project versus a client choosing to terminate a project, or and those could be walking away from a particular fee, or you give them as much information as possible so that they can complete the project. But we have been in court, and that ended just fine. And it was a great learning experience, and it also helped us shore up our contract, what to do in a situation where you feel that you're being abused or so on. So I would say make sure that's in your contract, and it is okay for a relationship to end. It's just how you end it.
I'll say to that too. I think on 2 occasions we tried to fire clients, and the communication was just so thorough and honest that by the end they just talked themselves back into the project. And I think initially one was a lawyer, and this client wanted to. I guess they were really trying to intimidate us. And so they were intimidating us by saying, I don't think this is going to work out. And so we just responded with calmness and had a full conversation. And by the end, they were just like, you know what? Well, can we just hit a restart button? Which was really funny. But I think the moral of all that is to say, just be very clear. If that's something you want to do, just be very clear about why you're doing it, and be sure that is the ending conclusion to the conversation.